Hey everyone, this lecture wants to examine the idea of utopias in art. And this is a predominant theme of most avant-garde movements, the idea of moving, directing, leading society to a new ideal. We're going to take a look at a couple art movements that seek to combine ideas, looking at the problems, the struggles, the political, social struggles of society, and believes that art can lead society to a new utopian type of vision. So when we say utopias, think of the Garden of Eden, think of some type of dystopian film where they're trying to enforce or impose this idea of equality, happiness, peace, there's no wars, right? So this kind of mythical type of existence. And what I love about modern art is that somewhat naive, but that audacious claim that art can be something more than just paint on a canvas. It can inspire, it can lead, and it can direct. I wanted to start our discussion of utopias today in Germany and talk a little bit about the end of World War I, which we've talked a little bit about, not necessarily directly, but we've talked about its influence. I wanted to take a look at art after the war. Again, we've been continuing that theme and we've been examining expressionism and surrealism and regionalism. I want to take a look at utopias and the art in between the wars. Because there's this sense that we're almost there. Society is almost at the summit of some type of social political mountain. And we're almost there. And all we just need is a little bit of more of a push, a last minute push. And we can get to that pinnacle where we can have peace and serenity. And all of the problems, the wars, the conflicts, the poverty, hunger, all of that's going to be gone, right? So art is going to help to get there, right? Thinking about the Treaty of Versailles and what's happening in Germany. The Treaty of Versailles was the treaty that ended World War I. And it took them, the armistice was declared on November 11th, 1918, and it took them about a year to hash out all of the different agreements and whatnot. But part of the Treaty of Versailles, and they just named it after the Palace of Versailles. That's where all of the dignitaries were coming to talk about the end of the war and who gets what land and who, how we're going to divide up Europe. And so they're meeting at Versailles, and this is essentially this is kind of a summary of the conflict that was imposed upon Germany, right? Number one is they're going to lose land, right? And if we take a look at this map here, it shows the amount of land that they're going to lose in both the East and the West. And so the dark tan lines in the East are lands that they're going to lose in the East, and then the West over here, they're going to lose this land over here. Now, this is going to be quite important, this land over here, because they have to give this to Poland. And so when Hitler comes about a couple years later, like a decade and a half, almost 2 decades later, he's going to come back and he's going to say, we want this land that we lost due to the Treaty of Versailles, which we don't really agree with, right? So he's going to invade this, and then England and France are going to declare war on Germany, right? So that's going to be important, but Germany is going to lose land. The other thing that they have to pay back is the war debt. And so they essentially blame Germany for the war, and so they have to pay back, and then they have to pay for reparations. They have to pay for payment to rebuild what has been destroyed, right? And so and this is the land that they lose in Africa, so they have to lose some colonies. And so the dark green were German colonies that they lost due to the Treaty of Versailles. And so they're losing their own land in Europe, and then they're losing land in Africa. And so this is another place that Hitler's going to target to get the land back, suggesting that it was wrongfully taken from the Germans. But thinking about the massive war debt, right? So they had to pay, I can't remember how many billions of dollars it was in today's dollars, but it was quite oppressive for them to have to pay back. And so they had to pay for the war debt and then rebuilding Europe in the aftermath. And then we think about this, and so signing this in 1919, and then fast forward 10 years later, we have the Great Depression in the United States, which we have the economic turndown. And so The old cliche is because America has such a large economy within the world, if United States gets the sniffles, the rest of the world gets full-blown pneumonia, right? So whatever we feel in the United States is only magnified by other countries. And so with that in mind, you have to think about how that's impacting the world. And then in addition to that, you have Germany that has to pay back the war debt. And so it just becomes even more problematic. It becomes even more costly. And so what the Germans decide to do is they decide to start printing money to pay back the war debt and the reparations. And if you have a reserve of just printing money, the problem is once you have more money in the system, essentially the dollar or the Deutschmark is the case here, is going to become worthless. The more of them that are out there, the less of value they are. And so as they were printing money, essentially the economy of Germany collapsed. And there's stories, apocryphal stories of people that were going to the store to buy a loaf of bread with a wheelbarrow full of Deutschmarks because, that's how much it took to pay for one loaf of bread. It was just a wheelbarrow full of cash. On the way to the bakery, someone came in, knocked the person over, took the wheelbarrow, dumped the cash out, and ran off with the wheelbarrow, right? So the moral of the story is essentially the Deutschmark was worthless, so that's why they dumped it out, but the wheelbarrow is something tangible, right? So we think about how bad the Great Depression was in the United States in terms of inflation and layoffs. It was even more so in Germany. And so this is setting the stage for World War II, essentially. Hitler's going to come in the 1930s and start saying, we need to make Germany great. We need to reconnect with our roots. We need to be great again, right? So this idea of trying to rebuild the German heritage, take land back, build up a military. Another element of the Versailles Treaty was that they had to demilitarize. They couldn't have a very large navy or army. They could only have so many officers, so many battleships, and so they had to really scale back, which left them feeling defenseless in the world. Mainly what happened as a result of this is England and France wanted to really punish Germany because they were pounded during World War I, and they wanted to make sure that Germany would never come back and be a threat. Ironically, their extreme approach made it so extreme that in Germany, economically speaking, that the people were so desperate that that a person came in that promised hope. They said, "I'll put you back to work. We're going to rebuild Germany. We're going to make us strong. We're going to make us a national power." That really resonated because people were so downtrodden in Germany that they wanted this hope. And so in a lot of ways, ironically, it set the stage for someone like Hitler to come in and take advantage of an extreme situation. Taking a look at art, though, what we have in the interwar period and the aftermath of World War I was the idea that maybe we can rebuild society through art. And this is where the Bauhaus comes in. Bauhaus is German. Bau is building and Haus is house. So it's a house for building, right? Bauhaus is German for house of building. It was an educational institution, so it was a school for art, developed in 1919 that sought to bridge art with industry to try to make art practical. Walter Gropius, a German architect, oversaw the merging of the Weimar Academy of Art and the Weimar Arts and Crafts Schools. And so these two different kind of ideas of art, right? Art, the Academy of Art, which is producing traditional art, sculpture, and plastic arts and such. And then the Weimar School of Arts and Crafts were mainly focusing on developing trade, right? Industry. Gropius believed that the future of art was uniting the fine art with industrial arts. The foundational teaching method sought to free students from past thought and biases to encourage innovation and creativity. One of the main focuses was on architecture. Some of the notable teachers were Paul Klee, Joseph Albers, Johannes Itten, and Vasily Kandinsky. Kandinsky embodied the values of the Bauhaus by finding ways to merge music, painting, theater, and dance into one powerful and more complete art form. And so it's this interdisciplinary approach to art that if we can make art useful, maybe we can inspire people back to work. Maybe we can inspire the economy to be reignited. Maybe we can, inspire new thoughts and new ideas to lead and direct Germany. I think maybe we take a look at that today and say that's perhaps naive to suggest that art can overcome something like the Great Depression, or even worse, the Great Depression in Germany. But I think there's something admirable about that kind of hope. This is just a passage from the Bauhaus Manifesto. The art schools must return to the workshops, right? The idea of function. We need practicality of art. We don't need just art that's hanging in a museum per se. We need something that people are going to understand, connect with, identify with, and use in their daily life. Now, I'm not speaking anything about against art in museums. That's great. I'm just thinking about this is the time, this is the mindset of where they're coming from in this kind of environment. This world of mere drawing and painting of draftsmen and applied arts must at long last become a world that builds. Architects, sculptors, painters, we all must return to craftsmanship, for there is no such thing as art by profession. This idea of just art for art's sake doesn't really make sense in this case. And so the idea of Dadaism, art for art or art anti-art, wouldn't make sense in Germany during this time. It's just the idea of making fun of art, the idea that art is all useless. They're suggesting that idea would be really foreign to the Bauhaus. Now, there was a Dadaist movement happening in Germany, so there is that component to it. It's not to say that all Germany thought one way about art, but the Bauhaus is suggesting taking a different approach. Rather than going towards nihilism, rather than focusing on the absurdity of how life feels, they suggest maybe we can just use art as a tool to reignite society and build hope once again, right? A different approach to how we think about these things. The style of the Bauhaus, right? It had its own distinct style. And I think we see this style, it resonates even to this day. If you think about any type of movie that's showing a modern apartment or a modern home, it's going to have elements of the Bauhaus style, right? So this is still predominant throughout many cities throughout the world, throughout much of the architecture, apartment buildings. They're all going to have this kind of aesthetic to them. The Bauhaus style developed into a strict focus on primary colors and angular lines. Curved lines to them, I'm not saying this is them saying this, suggest emotion and individualism, which to them are hallmarks of all modern ills. We need to get rid of the emotion, the individualism. Their focus is that we need to unite rather than be divided, right? So that's kind of where they're coming from with that. They desire to merge design and function, beauty and usefulness. The Bauhaus style is minimalist, and we'll take a look at how this is carried on in the second half of the 20th century with minimalism. Less is more. And you guys have heard the idea of someone living a minimalist life. I mean, that's becoming quite popular socially. Some people identify that as their aesthetic. I'm a minimalist, right? So this kind of begins here with this idea of the Bauhaus style. Houses, furniture, and art were stripped of ornamentation. So if we think about the context of this class, this would be the Baroque kind of movement, right? Where it's about being, Baroque is about being ornamental and elaborate. This is about trying to get rid of all of that. They asserted that this is the style of the modern industrial world. And so you see a couple examples of buildings that they design that have this aesthetic to them. Angular lines, right? Focusing on just, kind of these simple geometric shapes, right? This is the Bauhaus school, which is following that same idea, that same design, of which just needs to be very practical, very functional. You don't need any Gothic arches. You don't need any domes. It just needs to be very functional. And that's it, right? Now, the question that we might ask is, how is that supposed to inspire us? I'm not exactly sure, to be quite honest with you. I think there is something about its simplicity thinking about being simplifying a very complex and confusing world that I think that might appeal to people, particularly after World War I. And I think it appeals probably to people today when we feel like we're living in a chaotic and ambiguous world where it seems as though truth is elusive with things like AI, deepfake, and the like. It's hard for us to know what can we really trust in the media. And so something about simplicity becomes attractive in those types of environments. Here's a couple of examples of Bauhaus produced art, industrial art, right? Functional art. We see the chair that could be also used as a step stool. But the idea here is you can slide them all underneath one another, and then you can put them in the corner, and it's about simplicity, right? Here's another one which we might question, well, it seems like it's angular, which is individual, which they would not like, but they like the idea of using design and function, right? So the idea of merging them together. Here's another one. This one is just kind of like a basket. Simple colors, angular lines, focusing on simplicity rather than ornamentation, right? And I think if you think about the movies that we watch today where there is a urban setting and they're trying to convey that urban aesthetic, it's going to follow these principles. Now, this one's quite weird, demonstrates the idea of angularity for sure, but it's no wonder that this design didn't really take off. But again, it's the idea of using art and design and then applying it to industry, right? Let's take a look at a couple examples of artists coming from this. We've taken a look at Vasily Kandinsky before when we were examining German Expressionism. They like his ideas, his modern aesthetic. They like the idea that he's doing something new. They like the idea of abstraction, and so they hire him, right? Kandinsky was hired early in the Bauhaus before it became much more focused on removing emotion and expression from art. He found that certain colors, when paired together, would have a greater effectiveness in gaining the public's attention. So the idea with industry is how do we capture someone's time? How do we sell something, right? For instance, bright red with dark blue colors would be useful in advertisement to catch the attention of the public subconsciously to increase revenue, right? So this idea of how do we make art practical? How do we apply it? And so the idea of graphic design, the idea of advertisement, the idea of just designing products becomes extremely important for the Bauhaus. Here on this particular image, circles in a circle, we see the fundamental principles of Kandinsky and the Bauhaus. True to Kandinsky's form, it is abstract. There's no actual objects or any discernible forms being represented. It's just simple geometric forms. Different from his earlier German Expressionist movement in terms of, we see with his earlier works, much more expressive hand gestures with his improvisation number 28. This one is much more geometric. This one's much more orderly than that, focusing on the ideas of order and the Bauhaus, right? But the idea is it's about simplicity and colors, right? The idea is this design leads to greater harmony and beauty. And I think the idea was to simplify, again, the world of complexity to find universal truths and common elements, right? Here's just a sample of Kandinsky's color theory. Now, you can agree with this or disagree with it, but this is how he's seeing the world. This is how he's seeing his art. He suggests that blue is a heavenly color, I suppose because of the color of the sky makes our eyes generally look upward. That's generally what we think of when we think of blue. Yellow is the earth around us. Green, and I don't know why that wouldn't be the sun, where we're also looking up. But anyway, he suggests that's more of the earth connecting, but the idea of blue and yellow connect the heaven and the earth together. Green is passive and static. Again, don't ask me why. It's just an earth tone, perhaps. More of a neutral color, I suppose. White is the color of the beginning because it's void of color. And so it is the color of origin. Black is the eternal silence. And so the idea of these ideas coming together produces these emotions subconsciously within the minds and hearts of the viewer, right? His shape theory is this: circles are dull. And I think that he's probably influenced by the fundamental ideas of the Bauhaus. Squares are intermediate, and triangles deserve an energetic, luminous, psychotic color like yellow. And here we see the triangles in here having that yellow color to them. But of course, there is the red over here that also has that triangular color. But again, he's thinking about the idea of simple shapes, simple designs, right? Basic squares, triangles, and circles. The color is limited. It gives us a feeling that shapes and ideas take place in a world away from reality. This is where inspiration happens. It simply exists, right, without, maybe human or some type of origin. There is no buildings. There are no trees here. This is the rejection of the natural world to focus on the world of inspiration, imagination, right? It's the world of simplicity. This is the world of design, right? So again, we see similar ideas with this one, several circles being represented, but even more basic shapes with only circles here. We see simple colors with blue, red, yellow, purple, and green. It too has an unearthly feel to it, almost kind of a cosmic design to it. But he demonstrates the ideas of merging music, painting, theater, all together to produce this powerful, complete form of art. And suggesting that if we can perhaps bring all of the elements, all of the great elements of human innovation together, then we can all come together collectively and move together towards a better ideal, right? Kandinsky would create a work and ask a composer at the school to write a score that corresponded to the painting, to make it that interdisciplinary experience, that immersive experience. Paul Klee was hired to teach at the Bauhaus in 1920. He was to further help merge the visual and the industrial arts. Similar to Kandinsky, he focuses on this idea of abstraction and geometric shapes. Here we see the simplicity of design. I'm not sure what the term architecture has to do with this particular work, red and green architecture, other than the fact that it's angular, and so the architecture of Bauhaus is angular. Perhaps this is supposed to represent the modern urban city, which is angular. However, architecture does follow this same idea, right? The same basic ideas of basic shapes, basic colors, simplicity of designs in order to inspire people. Here we see another work. This one shows what Klee calls magic squares, which are simply color blocks put together. But again, simple shapes, simple designs in order to focus on simplicity over complexity. A couple other ones just to show you quickly. These ones look very similar to me, although one is a painting, one is a building. It almost looks like they are coming from the same type of design, focusing on just simple, basic angular shapes. And that is pretty much it. But again, the idea, connecting this to the theme for the day of Utopias, is to somehow use this art to inspire people or direct society to some better end. Let's take a look at how these ideas, similar ideas, are happening in the Netherlands with Piet Mondrian. Piet Mondrian was a Dutch artist who felt that art could be a catalyst for change. One of his philosopher friends, Shoemaker, wrote that there was an underlying mathematical structure to the universe that constituted true reality. Such ideas underscore much of Mondrian's works, who was on a spiritual mission to celebrate modernism and urban life and believed that the new city needed a new aesthetic that emphasized balance and harmony. So again, we see very similar, one could see this and think this is coming from the Bauhaus, right? Similar ideas, similar aesthetic, the idea of angularity, the idea of simplicity. Again, responding in this interwar period to the complexity, uncertainty, we have the rise of fascism in Italy, the rise of fascism in Germany. And so we have these ideas that these, extremist groups, we have a civil war happening in Spain, all of this political upheaval that's happening in Europe as people are still feeling the sting of World War I. They want simplicity. They want the ideas of harmony. And so you can see how they're trying to lead and direct society to try to find that peace, that inner peace. And so we see that with the Bauhaus. We see that with Mondrian, right? Here he focuses on bright colors and simple geometric forms. The offset colors create what he calls a dynamic equilibrium and transcendental calm, similar to that of what a stained glass window would do inside a church or something like a building, right? But the idea here with the simplicity of colors, I mean, it's super interesting that all of the angles here, all of the shapes are different sizes. The lines are different levels of thickness. And it gets us to question, it gets us to think about what is it doing and how do we find this kind of simplicity in the world around us rather than moving towards confusion, right? But we've seen similar ideas to this before. I mean, we've seen ideas, if we can take a look at the ideas of Dadaism. Dadaism is suggesting that the world is chaotic and confusing, and we need to begin again. We need to be able to find that harmony by tearing ideas down. Now, their art is much more abrasive and much more humorous, much more of a satire and sometimes rebellious. But it's a similar kind of idea, a similar kind of initiative that's happening in terms of trying to find order in a world that feels orderless. And I guess to Dadaists, they don't really impose a new type of order. I think that's one of the main differences. Here they're suggesting order can be found in simplicity. Order can be found in geometric shapes and very bright, simple colors. So they do promote that idea of, there is hope out there. Dadaism is less hopeful in that endeavor, suggesting that we don't really know what the answers are. So we're not going to present any to you because we believe that they might be wrong because the world seems chaotic. But we see that same element, that same concern of chaos here, right? This is a reaction to chaos, much like Dadaism is a reaction to chaos. The chaos here, though, is trying to find simplicity. It's underneath the surface. It's suggesting the world is chaotic. Let's find some simplicity within art, right? Let's take a look. We've covered Malevich before in terms of the Russian Revolution and regionalism. I just want to come back to these ideas just briefly in terms of connecting it to utopias. The idea of finding peace and harmony, that art can be this mechanism, this tool to lead and direct society to a new ideal. And so the idea, very similar to what we see with Kandinsky and Klee at the Bauhaus, very similar to what we see with de Stijl and Piet Mondrian, the idea of using simple colors and geometric forms in order to inspire people. Rather than finding chaos, they're finding simplicity, and maybe that can inspire people, right? But the idea for the early Lenin period of art was to try to use art, the abstraction of art, to lead and direct society. So here is the idea of beat the white with the red wedge, and the white is representative of the ruling party in Russia. The red is the symbol of the Communist Party. This is part of the Russian Revolution, part of inspiring people to create change. And so again, this is a direct link between art and social revolution, art and social change, trying to inspire people to create actual, real social, political reform within their respective societies, right? So again, this is the idea. I mean, Bauhaus wasn't that radical. They're not necessarily trying to say we need to take over the world in terms of a revolution, but they are suggesting art can be this source of change, right? This one is much more connected to kind of a political force of motion and change, but it has a similar kind of idea of pushing the boundaries of society, leading society to a new ideal. So they have that idea, that essence in common. Taking a look at Tatlin's Tower, this was to be a monument, a sculpture for the modern world. They never built this. This is the model of what it was supposed to look like, and it was supposed to be a large tower similar to the Eiffel Tower. But this is the modern structure. This is what's supposed to lead and direct society. The idea of the curved lines that never end, that just spiral upwards, to direct the attention of the viewers, to direct the attention of society upwards, constantly moving in one direction, constantly moving, evolving to become better. However, when Stalin gets in power, right, we've talked about this before, a little bit of review, he starts suggesting that art shouldn't be abstract, it should be representational. It should be easy to understand, to lead and direct society. And art like this was completely outlawed, right? And so there's a question here about what it is about this art that he had liked, and why is it that this art he didn't like. It could be, we can make an argument, that he didn't like this art because maybe it was too academic and over people's heads to be able to understand. Or the other side of this could be, or another side, I guess there's more than two, but another side to think about would be he believed that this was much more of a clear message to demonstrate what he wanted people to believe and think. This is much more open-ended, where people kind of get inspired to think and have their own thoughts and make their own connections. This one is, I'm telling you what to think and what to believe, right? So again, it's getting us to think about, how art is being utilized to create a utopian society. Stalin wanted to promote this idea of a utopian communist society in the Soviet Union. Here we see the election day of the Supreme Soviet, where everyone gets to happily go on and vote for their Supreme Soviet ruler. I guess the humor of this, though, it's not meant to be humor, but knowing the context of this, what's humorous about this is whoever was the communist leader got like 99% of the vote, which statistically just doesn't happen, right? And so the idea is that the election was rigged and the elections were rigged. And so the idea of people voting was, pretty comical to a certain extent. And that a lot of people felt that they didn't really have the free voice to vote, that they better vote for the right person, otherwise they're going to be persecuted. And so, but the idea here is that it presents the message that everyone has a voice, that this is a democracy that they're living in, or this one, a parachute before the mission. Very simple, people coming together harmoniously, this idea of technology and trade. Now, as we think about these ideas, right, thinking about the ideas of modern art, what is it about them what is it about modern art that political institutions are rejecting? Let's get back to our discussion of Germany. So we started our discussion with Germany and the extreme conditions that they found themselves in the aftermath of World War I. Let's return to that as we come to a close for this discussion and take a look at the art that's coming out of Germany at this time. Kirchner, the idea of Fauvism, the idea of returning to our roots, that we've lost something in our modern society, this urban world that's chaotic and confusing. Kandinsky, in his expressionism, focuses on rejecting the visual reality, focusing on the emotions of the interior, rejecting completely the exterior world of chaos and confusion, and turning to the inward self and representing music, representing the ideas and the emotions that he's feeling at the time. Or Chagall, another Fauvist, thinking about the ideas of floating, right, things that are not necessarily connected with reality. Or Klimt, as we see with Adele Bloch-Bauer, the idea of trying to find harmony between humanity and this modern industrial world, right? All of them have that kind of element to them. I hope that you can see the similar thread of thought, that the world feels chaotic and that we need to find another way to connect with people emotionally, or connecting with nature, or rejecting the world in some way, and returning to maybe an earlier, more primitive art form, or rejecting the art academies, which are much too academic, or rejecting the exterior world, or trying to find some connection to nature in some way, shape, or form. The art is seeking to, respond to, reject, maybe that's too strong, the modern industrial world. Now, these works of art are trying to do that. Then when Hitler comes into power, he says, this is all trash. This is what I want art to look like. So he completely rejects this movement towards abstraction, and he says we're going back to realism. And so he focuses on, very similar to what we see with Stalin's aesthetic, right? The idea of art in Russia. We see him returning to this idea of realism. And again, I want us to think about this. I mean, he according to Hitler's argument, that he's trying to recreate a Germany that was strong, a Germany that was vibrant, a Germany that was, he considers the Germany that he's building the Third Reich, the Third Empire. The First Empire was Rome. The Second Empire happened in the 19th century in Germany under Otto von Bismarck. And this is the Third Great Empire. But again, he's trying to connect to these roots of what made Germany great. There's a lot of similarities between what we see here and what we see with Gauguin and his primitivism, what we see with Picasso and turning to African art, the ideas of Klimt and trying to connect people with nature. Similar idea of responding to the world and believing that the world is chaotic and confusing and wanting to return to simplicity, right? There's a lot of similarities between this and what we see with Piet Mondrian or what we see with the Bauhaus. The idea of returning to simplicity is a different aesthetic. But what's interesting about this is his complete rejection of this particular modernist style, which has, if he took time to understand it, he would understand there's more similarities to the initiatives of trying to correct the corruptions of society. But what he does instead is he bans this work. He does put together an art show called the Degenerate Art, which he puts modern art in there to tease it, or he burns it in the streets to suggest that this is all decadent art that's mocking the world around us, and we need to return to our roots. And just to kind of leave off for the day, we've been taking a look at different versions of utopias. And as we think about this, right, as we think about these ideas that they're trying to find a better path, they're trying to stave off further destruction, something like World War II, which is on the horizon. They're trying to find a way to direct society to a new, better ideal where we can find harmony and peace. And we can eliminate things like poverty and hunger, right? And so they're believing art is a way for people to become inspired, for people to come together collectively, for people to unite. But it looks different in each area, right? And so the question that I want to leave with you, that I want you to think about after the lecture, modern art seeks to inspire people to see the world differently and move towards a better future. To this end, much of it has a utopian vision to guide and direct society to something better. And I've only given you a handful to think about in this slide, but we can also include Cubism. We can also include, with Picasso, we can include surrealism and the idea of returning to the inner mind to understand what we're truly made of. And if we can understand that, maybe we can be less violent. Maybe we can even, think about Gauguin's works. We can think about, Fauvism. We can think about Expressionism. And we can think about the ideas of Norman Rockwell, right? The idea of trying to demonstrate something better, right? Art movements may take different aesthetic approaches on this. It might all look different. But it has this similar kind of idea to direct and lead society to something better. My question for you is, which approach is more inspirational for artists to use to inspire society? Is it better for art to be more realistic, as we see with American regionalism, as we see with Soviet art, as we see with art of the Third Reich or Nazi art? Is it better to be more realistic in its aesthetic and less shocking and easier for people to understand the clear message? Or, the other side of this, is that too simplistic of an approach and not shocking enough for people to be able to get out of their complacency to create change. After all, people tend to not want to change. Now, on the other side, is art that is different, right? Art that's different, more inspirational because it's so different. It causes people to question and to think about why, right? It helps people to see the world differently. Or is this too above people's heads for them to even understand what's going on? That it takes too much effort. And maybe people are just too lazy to understand what's happening with it, to take the effort, right? Something to think about. And I'm not necessarily saying that there's I'm not going to tell you what is the right answer. I think that we can make an argument for both of them. I just want you to think about where you are on that spectrum. But a parting thought for you to think about, right, is consider a film that is inspiring to you. What makes it inspirational, right? Is a film just a nice story with a happy ending? Is that what makes it inspirational to you? Perhaps. Is that leaving you thinking about it 3 days later, a week later? Or is something that's a little different, that you didn't really expect, that looks different, feels different? Maybe it's more thought-provoking. Maybe it didn't necessarily have the happy ending. Kind of leaves you hanging. Kind of like a gut punch. Does that leave you thinking about it 3 days later or a week later, right? Thinking about, as an artist, I'm helping you to think about your artistic voice as you want to inspire people. What's more inspirational? Is it more inspirational to do something different, more shocking? Or are you going to miss the mark and people won't understand it? And so if the people don't understand it, it's not going to inspire them, right? Maybe. Or maybe if you lean towards the realism and making it so easy to understand, maybe people will look at it and shrug, and maybe they'll miss the point because they'll miss the message in some type of pretty image that's been represented. Maybe, right? I don't have the answer for this. I really don't know which is better, but it's something to think about for your future as artists.